Get the session started. For those of you who have joined us today, just so you know, you will receive a copy of this presentation. You will also receive the recording to the presentation. We will take a couple of very brief polls as we walk through the content of the presentation. We'll talk, starting off, a little bit about kind of what the current environment looks like, why obviously this process is important, how most folks are doing it today, and then some methodologies that can make this a more comprehensive, more complete, more holistic approach with software that can help automate this process without adding any additional resources to you as well, to really help make that process more continuous, real-time, and cover your entire ecosystem. And then we'll conclude with a brief product demonstration of tools that ShareShield has to help you in that process. And then we will take questions. And of course, for those who may be interested, we will make an offer to actually test this solution out for your organization. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Obviously, those of you who are on this presentation today know that healthcare organizations, have oversight through the Health and Human Services Group, and two of those monitoring bodies from a compliance standpoint are the Office of Inspector General and the Office for Civil Rights. The Civil Rights Group, of course, handles a lot of things related to HIPAA compliance, and the OIG is focused on making sure that organizations who are accepting any kind of federal or state funding are not working with individuals or vendors who have been sanctioned or excluded for participating in those programs. And of course, should your organization have that in place, there can be very significant fines that come to the organization, issues of reputation of the organization, having those types of individuals or companies working with that in that environment. And then those fines can actually be even more significant if you can't demonstrate that you've have a good process for this particular type of oversight. So the OIG currently recommends, or at least let's focus a little bit on what's happened in the last 6 months. Every 6 months, the OIG releases an investigative report that they report to Congress. There were a significant number of new providers that were added to this exclusion list. Just in the year of 2022, there were over 2,400 providers that were added to the list. There has continued to be an exponential increase in Medicare fraud with COVID. Still the effects of COVID back in 2020, given the lack of good IT and good compliance oversight. A lot of bad players have come in into the area to try to take advantage of those situations. And actually, there was just a report released recently that indicates that 2 to 5% of medical professionals in any organization are on the sanction list. And really, that's kind of a shocking number. Of course, if you are a very small entity, you may have more capacity to really screen the professionals and the employees and the vendors you're working with. But think of a large organization. On an average, at least they're probably dealing with 4 to almost 1,000 different types of professionals and vendors. And you can be assured, at least statistically, that 2 to 5% of them could be on the sanctions list. And of course, that can be very significant to you if you have any of those people operating in your environment. The costs can be very significant. Working with the provider, particularly if there's been any claims submitted by that provider, can be as significant as over $16,000 per claim. So think of it, if you had 100 claims or you had submitted, you're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in potential fines. And that's just on the claim action. It's not on the actions of the OIG once they investigate this. And of course, there are more and more hostile players that are coming in that are ending up on these lists. We have companies from Russia, people that may be working for those companies from Russia, China, Iran, that are getting added to these federal and state database lists. And if you don't have a means to screen those, you could be potentially having significant issues for your organization. So what are the OIG's recommendations and insight? They recommend that while there is not an absolute requirement, of course, the requirement is you better do this. If you have this, you're in trouble, particularly if you have people that show up on these lists that are operating in your environment. But from a best practice standpoint, they recommend that you screen all new employees, providers, contractors, and vendors. And I think a lot of organizations are probably pretty good at that first process of, if they're considering bringing somebody in, they're going to do a screen to just make sure starting off they're not working with the bad actor. But over time, those things can change. And the recommendation is that all of that, your ecosystem, be screened at least monthly. Your employees, your providers, your contractors, your vendors should be screened monthly. The reality is a lot of organizations aren't doing this because of, as we'll go into, the burden of doing that. And that you need to be able to provide solid proof of your screening activities, how often you're doing them, the dates that you did them, the databases that were checked. Should you have a bad player come into that environment, and lack of that can actually increase the amount of penalties that you have. And there's today over 150,000 currently sanctioned providers and businesses on the federal and state exclusion list. So a lot to try to monitor, particularly, obviously, one, you've got, I believe, 12 international databases, close to 5 national ones, and then there's over 47 states. If you're operating in more than one state, you should be checking those lists as well. So this becomes a very significant compliance challenge. While organizations know, and the fact is that OIG is actually beginning to become more, they're wrapping up their enforcement. I think they provided a little bit of leniency back in the last couple of years because of the nature of what COVID had done to healthcare systems. But given the increased fraud and abuse that's going on, they are turning up the screws in terms of enforcing this process. And this can be a very expensive and challenging process for those of you, depending upon how you're managing it. Most organizations, we find, are trying to do this, I would say, in a semi-manual process. They're going out, they're going to the different databases, they're checking them, they're comparing them to Excel spreadsheets or data sheets that they have on their vendors, their employees, their contractors, and the likes. And then they're doing basically what I would call spot checks. You're getting information at a point in time to understand where you sit with those folks that are in there. Oftentimes, they may not be doing this across the entire ecosystem. They may be taking, or you may be taking, what you may be deemed to be a high critical value companies or employees or providers, and just making sure that they're more regularly checked because of the significance if they were to end up on the list. So a lot of times they're kind of taking a stratified risk approach of just checking against some and not checking everybody. And that can be a danger. It can be a compliance danger to you. Some may be relying on external resources. There are companies that you can send this information out that will do those checks for you. And those are good processes. The only issues you run into them is, again, they are static in nature, meaning they're going to give you a picture at that particular point in time. And really, there aren't solutions that really enable real-time continuous integrity checks of all of your types of providers in an ecosystem. Until, I would say, new companies coming out, but we're going to talk a little bit about how SureShield has done this and does this for you to help protect you without really requiring you to add any significant resources around this process. So I'm going to just pause briefly and take a very brief poll. I would appreciate if you guys can go ahead and respond to this, and just trying to get a sense of within your organization, how do you actually go about managing this process? And we're just going to give it about 25, 30 seconds for the respondents to go ahead and respond. So if you go to the poll questions, please go in and ask. I see that there's some folks that aren't sure. And a lot of other folks that are responding right now are indicating that they either check this manually or may rely on a third party to do that as well. So I'm going to go end that poll, and we're going to go on to the next slide. So it looks like the majority of you, there's a few that are not sure, and then the others are either, a lot of the respondents have indicated they're checking this manually. And of course, if that's being done, then you are only getting it done once in a while and having latency time periods where no checks are being done. And of course, that can put your organization at risk. So how have SureShield and how have we kind of addressed this process? And we've employed technology. I'm going to show you a very brief slide. And Sanjay, maybe I'll ask you to step in and explain kind of the process that we've employed briefly. But we will go in and talk to you a little bit about how we've approached this from a real-time standpoint. So under the auspices of what we call the IntegrityShield solution for sanctions and exclusion management, what we have is a real-time automated and continuous monitoring process across multiple databases. We basically go out on a nightly basis and we scrape all of the, I think we now have more than 60, 65 databases that we're checking. And we're looking at those databases on a nightly basis. And then we are matching them up to the ecosystem of the, of the customer, the healthcare customer being yourself that we're working with. In many of our customers, they're having us check everything. They may have different functions within the organization that handle these processes, and they can all be, correlated together. So HR may be doing those employee checks. Your credentialing department may be doing that on your providers, and you may have the supply chain that's doing on vendors. That process can continue, but you will have a comprehensive view of how that's working within your entire ecosystem. And those are being done on a nightly basis. So we then also employ what I would call an exception-based process, and we'll show this to you when we go into the application. But if you are responsible or your organization is responsible for this compliance requirement and oversight, really what you want to know is where I need to focus my attention if we have an issue. Not necessarily if everything is going okay within certain providers, you want to be made aware that everything's okay. But more importantly, you want to know if there's an exception to what may have been there before. And so what we provide are that kind of exception-based information that will alert you or your individuals who have responsibility for those different areas that something may have shown up, and then we give you tools to take the proper actions on them. I've got kind of a an animated process to kind of show you a little bit how this would work if you were doing this yourself manually or with a third party, or if you were doing it with SureShield. So let's assume that you actually do have the capacity to do things on every 30 days, as an example. Let's say you are doing a check every month. If you look to the left-hand side and then look at the SureShield process to the right-hand side, on day one, you may have checked that provider. Come day 3, that provider could have ended up on the sanction list. If you're doing monthly checks, and as I said, a lot of folks aren't, they're stratifying this, or we've had organizations that say we just screen our employees once a year. You're looking at 365 days of something not being there. But assuming you're doing this monthly, on day 3, if that provider ended up on that list or that vendor, you would have no idea until you've done that rescreening 30 days later. So in this example, 28 days of potential penalty are right there in front of you. In the SureShield process, because we are scraping and we are looking at these things daily, anytime there is an exception to that, we may have screened that provider on day 1, and day 3 they end up as an exception on that list. You would be immediately notified, and you would have the tools to take the proper actions to act on that. So we find that our customers really find this to be almost like an automated system working for them to give them peace of mind 24/7. Before we go into, going over and showing you a demo of how this works, Sanjay, I'll just ask you to speak just at a high level from a technology standpoint, how this works.
Sure. So literally what Tom just indicated in a couple of slides prior to the last slide, what this is basically showing is our process that we have in place. Think of IntegrityShield primarily putting your integrity checking program on autopilot. We do the hard work for you. Every night we go out to different data sources, both state as well as national data sources, and compile all of that data and aggregate it internally behind the scenes to be checked by your organization's active monitoring records. So the data sources are current and kept updated. On the other hand, your organization would have loaded up certain records to monitor from different source systems, such as HR, medical staff, contract management systems, or vendor management systems. Those records would then be screened every night. And in the morning, when you come, you will have automated alerts and prompts that will literally tell you whether you have something to worry about. And Tom is actually going to highlight some of all of that. So the work that is to be done is primarily addressing the matches that the application might have found when it did the check. Aside from that, you don't have to really do anything more within the application, and it will keep a complete log of all of the activities that you perform.
Exactly. So I'm going to close out here for a minute and get to a brief demo of the application. And while I'm doing that, I also want to point out questions that folks have often have is, how do you get at the data sources? Well, we've made this very flexible. We have some organizations that are smaller that don't have as much updates to the data each time, so they may go in and just add new records as they come in. We have some that will add upload data on a regular basis, and then our more, what I would say, customers that want even more continuous oversight are given, we have integration to those different data sources to bring that in and always be checking on those as well. So I'm going to sign into the application. And one other thing to note is, oftentimes what we're also doing is helping improve the quality of the information that you may have within the database as well. As you know, sometimes a match could be made or matches are identified, but the corresponding data that you have to the corresponding data that is in the databases may not be as good quality. And we will actually help give you some visualizations into that to know what kind of records you may need to address to improve the quality of the data. And you can see here, as I've signed in, it's giving me some information, kind of a brief overview on that to tell me where I have matches that have been found, records that need to be acted on, and then others that may have some poor quality information that we need to update. And we provide a whole bunch of processes to help you do that. So right now I'm coming into a dashboard that's helping me understand within my ecosystem, areas that I need to take action on. And I'll come back to that in just a minute to just give you, but first to give you kind of an overview of that full ecosystem. So in this example right now, I've gone and I'm looking at my whole list. And you can see here within this demo organization, we have 991 different types of entities that are being screened on a nightly basis. You can see that it gets broken up into your medical staff, your employees, the vendors and contractors you have, the individual vendors and contractors that you have. As I mentioned, you can very easily add new providers into this by simply clicking on this add button, and it would just ask for some information on what is needed, or you can upload information into the system to add to what may already be existing. And again, we also provide the methodology, as I mentioned, to be able to do this in a more streamlined, automated process. But in this, right now, this is telling me that we have over 900. There's matched records there's records that have been matched. And if I go to back to my dashboard here on this, what we would call the workload list, this has been giving me some information on records that got matched that then allow me to go in and take action on those particular records. So if I were to look at those matched, those in the matched record work list, it would show me who those are. It's already telling me that we've added them to a work list. A work list would be something where we need to gather more information once we've identified these to validate that information or to take a particular action on that particular individual. You'll note if I were to click on the work list for this particular physician, it's showing me what databases he was exactly matched on. So he was in the New York, the LEI, and the SAM. All of them this particular provider had been added to those lists, or were identified in my organization as being on this. You can see that it's showing me a variety of different tasks that have been assigned to take action on this. So we have identified this individual. We're going to give that person a quick opportunity to respond to what we've identified before we take a particular action, which could be to exclude them from or to remove them from our environment and protect ourselves, right? And then it will also show all the activities that have been taken on this individual, as well as the full, what I would call, history and check logs. So again, if you were ever to have a situation where you did have folks, or you were going to be audited by the OIG, they're going to want to see a history, a proof that you actually had a process in place. And what this will show is, and that check history will show all the databases that were checked, how often they were checked, when they were checked, what were the results of those checks as well. And those, again, help significantly reduce the compliant, your exposure if you were to have worked with someone. And obviously, it's also going to help you prevent yourselves from working with someone. Now, within the system as well, we also provide the means. Of course, as I said, on the initial screening, we provide ad hoc screening processes as well. So let's say you had someone you were considering bringing in, and we just want to do a quick check before we add that individual. So I'm going to go check on this Charles R. Leach. It's a physician that we're looking at bringing into the organization. And already it's showing me right now that this particular individual showed up on a SAM list. Now, my data was only showing that I had the name of this particular, the record name of this individual is Charles R. Leach. And because of that, we're trying to give you some data quality match information as well. So we can see on a composite identity match, because we're primarily just identifying that particular individual's name, the percentage of likeliness can be lower. So maybe I have a little bit more data on this particular doctor, and so I happen to have that individual's NPIN number, and I'm going to pop that in here. Sorry, this is an individual. And what we're going to find when we do this is that it's going to show that the match information is that much better. Now I have that in, that in-pin number, and now you're going to see that composite score is going to go significantly higher. And now, because we've identified this on an NPIN, I can be pretty certain, knowing this, that this particular individual is the same individual, and therefore I probably do not want to take bring that individual into my environment. The other thing that we provide, and again, an excellent screening methodology for this, is we're not only checking current status, but because we're scraping these databases on a nightly basis, we also have information on past individuals. And oftentimes, it's not always the case, but it's not unlikely that someone who's been on there in the past and has been off could very likely be ending up on there again. So we will actually provide information to you on not only current status, but also past status on that individual. And that can be very, very helpful in the initial screening process as well, to say, hey, we've got someone that ended up on this list. We may not want to even go down that path with that person or that vendor right now. Just to give you a sense again of the databases, as I mentioned, we have over, close to 60 databases that are being checked on a nightly basis. So you can see again on the stratification of this, we have the international databases that we're checking. We have the national databases, the FDA, the LIE, the SAM, the OFAC, as we said, that's an international database. And then currently today, states, there's over 45 states that have those as well. So it's very useful when you're looking at this information to see, again, where those folks are. And if they've ended up on those lists, you have a very simple way to actually take action on determining how you're going to work with them, and also be able to demonstrate that as a audit trail and an oversight activity process that you have in place that further protects your organization. Lastly, the system comes with a ton of different reports that you have available to you. Those reports can be scheduled so that they go out to various individuals on a however frequency basis you have. You may want to have particular reports that are sent to your compliance committees to show that you're putting these things in place. I'm just pulling an example of one report that then gets generated that can show you the status of your overall data, the quality of that data, how often things were done. Again, these are various types of reports and audits that can be helpful for you at the organization level. And then, of course, should you have any kind of review or investigation, all of that data is at your fingertips to hand over and show that you have good, solid processes in place. So that is our IntegrityShield product. Sanjay, I don't know if there's anything else you want me to point out or highlight.
You can just highlight just how reports get generated, even though in this demo account, we don't have all of them activated, but it's super easy to generate reports as well.
Yeah, you just pull those, like I was just showing, there's certain reports, you can pull those reports, you can schedule those reports, you can determine who you want them to go to, you can set the frequency of those reports as well. So I'm going to pause here and go back to our presentation and really talk a little bit about, again, the benefits of the IntegrityShield program. It's really a very simple and easy product to start up. It's a web-based solution, so actually activating the system can be turned on literally in minutes. If we are looking at integration with other data sources, we will set up processes to help work with the appropriate folks to provide those feeds, but those are not required to actually get started in working with the product. Most folks initially will give us an upload of their current ecosystem, and right then all the checks are done and you have that process in place. Again, it's managed by exception. So really it's helping you as an organization focus on things that you need to be focused on, right? I want to know if there's an issue, I want to address that issue and kind of know where my high risk areas are, as opposed to screening somebody, letting the system do the screening. And if things are okay, I don't need to worry about acting on those. And again, it can provide a complete ecosystem coverage. We do have some companies that may still want to use, for instance, in the medical credentialing, they may want to still have, work with someone else or have a process in place, but they're using the system to do all of their vendor contracts, all of their employees and the like. So there is flexibility in how that gets activated for you as well. So with that, I'm going to pause and open it up to any questions that the audience that is here may have. And then we will also, as part of that, launch one more poll that will allow you to, if you are interested in actually trialing out the solution, I'm going to open that up to the audience here. If you do have an interest in trying this out, again, you don't have to necessarily commit. We can help you work and screen a certain set of your own clientele to just see how that matches up for you as well. And if you are interested in that offer, please go ahead on in and respond to that question. For those who may be interested, someone from SureShield will reach out with you to get that set up for you. But let's go ahead and take any questions that we may have with the audience here. And the question, actually, the only question that I see here today is a question about costs and how is this priced out. So rather than, many other companies charge per check, we don't do that. We actually have a predictable licensing cost for the use of the product. We will look at the magnitude of your ecosystem, meaning the size of the different records that do need to be checked. And then there is what I would call a sliding scale license charge for the use of the product to do that for you on a continuous basis. And I see that there's a couple of you have indicated interest in trialing. We will be reaching out to you. For those of you who aren't interested now, obviously we will continue to keep you updated with activities that are going on with SureShield. Again, we are seeing a lot more oversight and a lot more enforcement of this process. And hopefully we can help you make that a lot more easy for you as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the session. Should you have any interest in more information, please reach out to us at info@sure-shield.com. You can visit us on LinkedIn. And again, we will continue to stay in touch with you with updates on what's happening with us and ways that we might be able to assist you as well. So that concludes our session. We appreciate your time and hope that we may have an opportunity to work with you here in the future. And again, for those who have indicated yes, we will be reaching out to you shortly. Thank you.
I think it was only two.